Life is a roller coaster. And when you're young, you get in the car and they lower the safety bar in front of you and you start that long, slow trip up the first hill. And it has a soundtrack that goes with it. It goes clank, 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 clank. And the machinery drags you all the way to the top. And as you ascend, the scenery spreads out below you like a drop cloth. And the heavens actually seem to get maybe just a little bit closer. Clank, 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 clank. The clanky trip up the first half seems to just take forever. It's like you'll never get there. And as you go up and in the days of your youth and you see the pinnacle approaching, you begin to think things like, man, if only I could graduate from the university, or if only I could find the right angel investor for my startup, or if only I get the correct degree so I can position myself for my Nobel Prize, or whatever it is that your aspiration is. That's, you kind of see that at the top, and you know that the delay in getting up there is sort of the penalty that goes with trying to rise high, because high is far away, and it takes a while to get up to the top, and then there's this pause, this moment of equilibrium, this breathless hesitation for just a moment, and you start down the far side of hill number 1, and that's where the screaming starts. Ah! Now, have you noticed there on roller coasters there are two kinds of screamers? There are the white knuckle screamers who have the safety bar like this. Ah! And then there are the hallelujah screamers that are ah! They have their hands up like that, but everybody's screaming because everything I wanted when I got to the top, once it actually starts to happen, it turns suddenly into something else. Gold turns into lead, and that great job I fought for now wants 90 hours a week from me. And that fellowship I got put me in a lab that's full of toxic chemicals, and that significant other that I was so wanting to bond with has turned out to be so completely irritating to me. And my investors who got my startup going now want to control every breath I draw. What has happened? This is not what I signed up for when it seemed slow and ponderous and I thought it would all never get here. What seems desirable, what seems like it's going to be easy, have turned into the very forces that bind me up and grind me down. It's as if the social contract, the silent agreement between you and the world about how it's going to go, has been broken without our permission. And we're now not the shapers of our lives, but you become what feels like kind of the victim of your life. Maybe I should have chosen the merry-go-round instead. Sure, it doesn't go anywhere, but it doesn't scare you to death and make you feel like you're going to die any second. World champion boxer Mike Tyson put it this way. He said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And this is exactly how life is. You think everything's going to go great, clank, 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 and then suddenly you're punched in the face. Or could I say you're punched in the faith? F-A-I-T-H. And that can happen to a group, not just to an individual. It certainly happened to the people who were following Jesus in the city of Corinth in the first century. They got punched in the faith. Now their clank, clank, clank phase had gone really well. They were really doing great. The city was a Roman colony, so they had all the advantages of citizenship, which were considerable. They had the stability provided by Roman law, the protection of the Roman armies. It was Pax Romana for them every day of the week. Their location put them in a place where they really had a stranglehold on trade in the region, and the cash just flowed like water into their coffers. Their city featured the largest amphitheater in the ancient world in their region, which spoke to their commitment both to political debate and as well to the arts. And all of that rolled together had this one outcome: material prosperity. The Corinthians in the ancient world almost had the equivalent of a middle class, if you will, which is, it's really unheard of in most of that environment. And they had pretty much achieved it because of the stability and the income that was guaranteed by regular regional trade. But the best development that happened to them was that the good news about Jesus, the Son of God, arrived in their city with a man named Paul, the apostle, and his team in the middle of the first century. He he spent 18 months there setting up a Christian faith community in the middle of all of this trade and the Romans and all of the prosperity, and it really went very well. Aren't you delighted when a project goes very well? His project went really, really well. And it went so well, he left after a year and a half, and he sailed about 180 miles to Ephesus, which would be on the western coast of modern-day Turkey, and set up headquarters there for other responsibilities, and went on with what he was doing. And then they got punched in the faith. And he begins to get emissaries and letters from the Corinthians telling him, we have so many problems. And the sort of the tone of it is, why did you ever leave us alone, Dad? We're really messed up. Everything that seemed so easy in the clank, clank, clank phase has turned into the screaming. And some of us are screaming with our hands up, and some of us are white knuckle people, but we are screaming. And you've got to give us a hand. And so there is an exchange of letters back and forth. Paul may have actually written as many as 4 letters to them. The one we'll look at today, we call 1 Corinthians, although it almost certainly isn't. It's probably 2nd. And in these, he's trying to help them get back to Christian normal. What has happened to the Corinthians is their Roman culture, they're in a Greek area, but their culture is completely Roman, has come with them on this roller coaster ride. And it's flowed into their lives, and it's brought things with it. Not all of them are negative. Some of them are quite positive. But the negative things have proved to be toxic to their ability to follow Jesus. Our series of teachings this month has been called Christian Normal. We're talking about how we live in the real world, where we have these cultural things that we have to face. We're not in a test tube or a biosphere experiment here. We're in the East Bay. We're in an Egyptian arts theater in downtown Berkeley, California, and we have got to figure out how to walk this walk with Jesus while we're with real people in this real world. The first week of the series, we talked about navigating the cultural forces themselves, and the best way to do that is to be a contributor of what's positive to that culture. And then last week, we talked about the divisiveness that the Romans brought into the church because of their love for forming fan clubs based on celebrity speakers, and how that led them to be at war with each other inside this brand new little faith community. It was so ugly. Paul writes to them and says, I can't even talk to you really like you're Christians, because you're not acting like you're different in any way. You're just like the world around you. So the biggest challenge that they confront is, as with all of us, our starting point, what we bring on the roller coaster ride. But the second challenge that they confront is when circumstances suddenly change for the negative, when you get punched in the face. And it raises the question, can the faith that you buy into in the clank, clank, clank phase really sustain you when the circumstances are different and the assumptions it was based on have been radically changed? You've heard people say things like, well, that's all great for soccer moms in the Bible Belt, but this is the East Bay. The assumptions are different here, and so what seems to work for believers or evangelicals or whatever word you would use in another place, in another time here, it might be a little bit out of place. I've been asked over and over and over, why would you come to a place like Berkeley to start a church? I mean, doesn't all that work better in flyover territory? And shouldn't you seek out a place where there's demand and market for it? And it just seemed to us that our region was really underserved by the Christian message. There were people here that needed to hear that, and there was a lack of ability to get up close to the message in a place like this. And being here, we're right in the beating heart of everything, and that message can be expressed to people in a way that they can actually reach out and touch. Now, this city had a population of about 100,000. It had a vibrant economy. It was near the sea, and it had a range of hills behind it that reached 1,800 feet, which ironically is exactly the height of the Berkeley Hills. So you draw your own conclusions. Within the next season of time, as Paul begins to write these letters back to attempt to solve their problems, he's dealing with so many things at once that 1 Corinthians appears to be a kind of a rambling letter that just goes from problem to problem to problem to problem. And so he is trying to put out fires the way those massive fire crews out around Sacramento are attempting to stop those huge brush and forest fires. and it seems that everything he tries, another blaze breaks out somewhere else, because the conditions are just so conducive to things going wrong, given the social changes and given the cultural influences they're bringing in. So what was it that punched the Corinthians in the faith? Paul refers to it in chapter 7 of 1 Corinthians in just one simple phrase. He says, I think that in view of the present distress, it is good for a person to remain as he is. Now, these two words, present distress, are the pivot around which all of chapter 7 turns. What is he talking about, present distress? In a word, he's talking about not persecution, he's talking about famine. There is a grain shortage that has developed in the region, one of 3 that took place that we have documented from the first century. And even a modest grain shortage could create near chaos in a city of this nature, a Roman colony. As soon as the shortage developed, word of it would reach the markets, and people who were speculators in the grain market would buy up everything that was left in order to move prices as high as possible and profiteer from the emergency that was taking place. And sometimes the supplies were so small that even the profiteers couldn't buy anything up, and the specter of famine was looming over absolutely everyone. All of this is compounded by the fact that the city of Rome, way back in Italy, demands a massive share of the region's grain supply to feed its own citizens. The reason is really simple. Almost every population in the ancient world is about 5 meals from revolution. If people become hungry, they feel that the social contract has been broken with the government, and revolt becomes a real possibility. And in Corinth, there is a very active memory of the fact that their gleaming, new, prosperous startup city is actually built on the site of an original city that the Romans invaded and burned to the ground and left in ashes for 100 years. Now, if there's revolution in Corinth, Roman armies are going to show up at the gates, and that scorched earth thing is going to happen all over again. And so people living in the city, well, they're terrified. They're wondering if their families are going to survive. They're wondering if they are going to survive personally, if they're all going to starve to death. They're wondering, as was really common in the ancient world, when the food riots were going to start. And the unrest was going to turn into revolt. Revolt was going to turn into revolution. And revolution was going to turn into war. And this was going to be the end of the world as we know it. Now, compounded on top of that is Jesus mentioned famine as one of the signs of the end of the world. And these young believers may have received that by oral tradition and thought, perhaps this food shortage is, maybe this is it. Maybe it's not just a temporary dislocation. They're expecting Christ to return at any day. Maybe this is apocalypse now. Maybe this is the last trumpet, and we're almost at the very end of time itself. And so they're wondering, is there any future at all, either in a temporary sense or in an eternal sense? Temporary in terms of our physical ability to survive the famine, and eternal in terms of Christ coming back and just clearing the stage for an entire new era of matter and time and everything else in the universe. And so the Corinthians, with this kind of stuff in their minds, send Paul a list of questions. We have some fragments of some of them. And essentially what they're concerned about in chapter 7 is, given that we're facing either a temporary and or a permanent end to everything, what should we do with our relationships? And so chapter 7, he lists 6 questions that they have asked him. And we're just going to give you a summary of them here because they all revolve around the same idea. The first had to do with married people, and we'll read the full verse here in just a couple of minutes. And their question to Paul was, should we have sex within marriage or not? We think maybe not. That's the Corinthian position. Interesting. Singles, should we get married or not? Married people, again, should we stay together or should we split? Things are so hard. Are we really going to make it work together? Lifestyles, my job, who I work with, should I stay in my current lifestyle or should I go look for something else? Engaged people, should we go ahead and get married, or because of this present distress, should we not get married? Should we just hold off and make sure that we're in a position to survive all of this? Widows, once they're alone, should they remarry or should they remain single? You see how that all kind of spins around the same axis. Their question is, should we stay with the program or should we bail out given the fact that we're in an emergency? Doesn't an emergency call for emergency measures? And if we need those emergency measures, maybe we should do things as we are suggesting here. Maybe our widows should stay single. Maybe our married people should split up. Maybe our married couples should stop having sex. Maybe our betrothed people should stop their plan to go ahead and get married, and we should hunker down and prepare ourselves for the end of our world and maybe for the end of time. It's a little bit like a survivalist mentality almost, because it's hard to put it in our terms, but the cloud of fear that would come with the possibility of everyone going hungry was a very real thing for them, and sometimes it wiped out whole populations. It was no thing that happened somewhere in the developing world. I mean, it was right here, right now in our city, and they're afraid of all of that. So here's what Paul responds to them. All of these things revolving around the same axis. He says this in verse 17 of chapter 7. Only let each person lead the life that the Lord has assigned to him and to which God has called him. This is my rule in all the churches. What is your perfect life? Do you have an image in your head what your perfect life would be? If you could have anything, if you could arrange your circumstances in any way, you would reach out and shape your future into a configuration that would provide you with the maximum level of satisfaction, and you could have this existence that would give everybody else on Facebook the fear of missing out. Because when they saw your pictures, they would all go, dang, if only I could live a life like that. Well, here's the Roman perfect life. This is what every Roman wants. 1, marriage and children. Because achieving domestic bliss is one of the highest values in Roman culture. Now, it comes with a couple of asterisks, but this is what every Roman sought out, to have at least that postcard image of a great family that was doing great things. The second thing that every Roman wanted was joy in their heart. They weren't really clear on how you got that necessarily, but to have that kind of personal enjoyment of life. And the third thing every Roman wanted was a ton of cash, to be able to go out and buy things and do things. Now, that's not terribly far off from what a lot of people want in different cultures around the world, but this is the Roman ideal world. And Paul basically presents to them Christian normal, which is this. The perfect Christian life is to be faithful to God's call and God's will. And then the chips fall where they may. You see how radical that is? That's way more radical than if you're a widow not getting married again. That's way more radical than breaking off your engagement. That's way more radical than anything that he offers in response to them from these 6 questions. Is listen to the Lord, find the call that he has in your life, and walk his will out for all of your life. That's Christian normal. Here's a case study. It comes from the first few verses of chapter 7. It says, now concerning the matters about which you wrote. And now the next phrase is actually a quote from a letter or verbal communication that the Corinthians sent to him. So it's really a rare thing in the New Testament. We have this little fragment of their problems in their own words. This is what they were saying to him. It is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. The context there meaning woman is wife. And this is how Paul responds to their statement. He says, but because of the temptation to sexual immorality, he's talking about adultery, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. In other words, it's not a question of me having my rights and demanding them. It's me giving myself to you, you giving yourself to me, as we're spouses. It's a mutuality, an interdependence here, which is very, very different from the Roman theory. Probably what the Corinthians are asking is, should we hold off on having sex within our marriages in order to prevent pregnancy because the times are so terrible have you ever heard anyone ask, do I want to bring children into a world like this? It was sort of that idea. It wasn't so much proving that they were holy or something, but it was their concern with the consequences for their family, with the impending disaster that they felt was upon them. Now, in this context, the only real means of birth control are abortion and infanticide. And the Christians in this faith community are not going to support any of that. And so the Corinthians, knowing that, would just go to Paul and say, within our married relationship, should we just practice abstinence? Well, I mean, what do you think? And he says, and I'm grateful for this, no. And you think, well, I mean, doesn't their question kind of make sense? I mean, things are really terrible. Wouldn't it be, isn't that why people don't have big families anymore? And so forth and so on. But the problem is that in their context, Roman husbands assumed adultery as a right, not an exception. In fact, the idea of having sex outside of marriage was a way of saying, I'm going to take my temptations, my sin, the dark side of me, and I'm going to express all of that with other women outside, away from my spouse. I'm not going to, bother her with all of that, so that what I bring to my wife are sort of the better angels of my nature. So I bring to my wife the good me, the righteous me, the faithful me, and the bad me, the unfaithful me, the part of me you don't want to know under any circumstances. I'll express that with the maid and with my girlfriend and with my 5 mistresses, and then I'll come home, and the part of me that my wife will get is the good husband, the faithful man. And so, in a way, in the Roman mind, a husband who practices adultery is honoring his wife by only bringing her the best of him. Man, you can just rationalize anything if you want to, can't you? But that's exactly how they thought. And so the Christians in Corinth, they're the only people in town who don't believe this. And so when Paul hears this, let's just stop having sex in our marriages, his response is, you've got to be kidding me. If you do that, you know what's going to happen? Temptation is going to overcome you. You're going to be dragged off into the culture again, and you will destroy the very marriages that you are trying to protect. Corinth is no more immoral than any other city. It's just a Roman city with a culture that endorses a powerful patriarchy, in which the primary advantage of the patriarchy is you never have to settle for one partner exclusively. And the Christians bring this whole new witness into the city that says, yes, sex is a great thing. It's a gift from God. It's for marriage. This is a revolution in Roman culture, and it's not much less than that today. So Paul does the radical thing and says, look, this is a good thing, it's a gift, participate in it as much as you possibly can, because it bonds you together and it shelters you from this overwhelming temptation. Many Gentiles in the ancient world found themselves drawn to Judaism, and we believe later to Christianity, because of the moral decency that these believing families would model in a world that had just gone crazy on these issues. So he's telling them this: don't panic, don't reshuffle all of your relationships, don't jump off the roller coaster. It's going to go up and down, it's going to be uncomfortable, but jumping off is the only way you can lose everything. The roller coaster is going someplace. It's going to a destination. What differentiates a roller coaster from a merry-go-round is that the merry-go-round has no destination. It has no endpoint. So the Christian worldview is differentiated by the worldview of the city in that it is not cyclical, it is linear. It goes somewhere. And here's where it goes. Verse 29. This is what I mean, brothers. The appointed time has grown very short. From now on, let those who have wives live as though they had none, and those who mourn as though they were not mourning, and those who rejoice as though they were not rejoicing, and those who buy as though they had no goods, and those who deal with the world as though they had no dealings with it. For the present form of this world is passing away. On this roller coaster, he's arguing that it's great to be married. It's great to get engaged. It's great to get married. It's great to have sexual expression inside your marriage, as long as you understand that there's a bigger picture operating in the background, which is that all of these material things are temporary. Got my degree? Temporary. Won my fellowship? It begins to erode the second that you have it. Beautiful new house up in the Berkeley Hills? Temporary. Forest fires have certainly proven that to us. Great new life partner? Temporary. Got my first raise, my first promotion? Temporary. Riding on the Google bus? Temporary. Getting that great massage after work? Temporary. Chef-made meals brought to my desk by someone in a big white hat that looks like a mushroom? Temporary. It's all temporary. The world is passing away, he says. And so he's saying, stay on the roller coaster, stay in your relationship, stay where the Lord has called you, but just be aware of the fact that there is a bigger plan running in the background. And that plan is that the Lord is returning, that a trumpet will sound, that the sky will split, that God's people will be caught up off the earth, that Jesus will come back, that he'll judge the quick and the dead, that he'll judge people by their deeds, that those of us who have embraced him by faith are going to be able to stand before him one day and just say, it's so good to see you. It's so good to see you. His death on the cross forgives us, cleanses us, washes away everything as if it never happened, and reconciles us with God. And it opens the way for Christ to come back and to make the world a place that we did not know it could be. Ultimately, cleansed by fire, the scripture says, and from the ashes, like Corinth came from the ashes of that scorched earth, a new heaven and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. As long as we know what's permanent and what's temporary, we can ride the roller coaster right to the end. If we get those confused, we'll be sucked in by the culture and lose the thread on the ride. Lord, we thank you that you are always doing something. That no matter how crazy our ride on the roller coaster might seem, that there is never a time when you're not up to much more than we can observe. That you're caring for us and loving us, and that you are going to be the one who closes the final curtain on history, Lord, and the one who reconciles us and brings us into eternal life. We're grateful that even when things seem crazy and random, even when we get punched by life, that your larger plan is always and forever operating, and that you will faithfully see us through to the end of the ride. We are so grateful for that. We thank you for it in Jesus' name. Thank you. I'm going to ask if you would stand with me, please, for a few minutes. Our band is going to lead us in some additional worship just before Randy comes with our communion service today. And if during this time, if you'd like to have someone pray for you, we'll be over here in the aisle, and we'd be honored to be able to pray with you. If this is a moment where that would be appropriate for you, then we'll have our communion service.